Welcome to Bitcoin Escape Plan. I hope you enjoyed your Thanksgiving meals. Let's get into the chart. So as always with these videos, I'm going to start off with the 4-hour chart, get right into it, see what I can see for the next couple hours just to reward anyone who is watching in the first couple hours of the videos being released, which thank you so much. Really appreciate you guys being here. Like, comment, subscribe, all of that. So this is where we're at right now. Price looks like it closed the day, let's double check that for accuracy, at 90.9, which is still above that daily fib pivot, which should be at 90.4. That's where that would be. As you can see, some confluence on the 4-hour chart as well around there that is worth paying attention to. It does seem to be reacting strongly to that level at the moment. This is what we want to be paying attention to right here. This is the 4-hour SMA, still on an uptrend, which is good because obviously, as we zoom out, it's been on a downtrend for a minute since Wednesday, November 12th. It's been in a downtrend. So it is fairly important to note that it is back in an uptrend. This I talk about a lot. This is the anchored VWAP. That's what that green line is. I never redraw that. I know that some people do shorter time frames for that. I never redraw that. That's literally drawn from 2009 until now. So pretty important when it shows up on the hourly or the 1-hour chart. As you can see on the 1-hour chart, we are still below, or just above rather, on the lowest band, whereas on the 4-hour, where we spend most of our times early on in the videos, this is the upper band that we are breaking. We're nowhere near the lower band. The lower band is way over here. But we don't really touch, if we look at the 4-hour briefly for a longer history, we pretty much only touch the top. In a prolonged bear market, we will see it go down closer towards the middle, but I don't even think this is entirely accurate just because I'm not paying for trading views, so it won't show me past like 5,000 daily candles or whatever. So I'm sure that would extend slightly differently. Okay, so what are the levels that you need to pay attention to in the next couple hours, which is what I should have said earlier. I don't think we're going to go back down here. It's possible. More likely, we're going to see a test here at 90.2, which it looks like this guy already wicked here earlier this morning. As a result of this, the market's going to deem this as a failure from earlier today. And that's going to pull us down to this SMA, which still looks fine. And, as you can see over here, we reacted to it fairly strongly. Same for here with once it's curved. So there's not really any reason to assume that we won't make another test for the anchored VWAP as we continue this trending upward, other than if it's a clear rejection, then obviously we'll see that reflected in the SMA starting to curve downward instead of remaining up tilting. But at the moment, we don't have any evidence for that, so we can just assume that the price will continue to trend higher in the short term. So that's pretty much it for the 4-hour. We got to watch for 93.6 again. It failed that. This is an older one, 92.6. That looks like the one that we actually are kind of basing price structure off of, is this older pivot, which we closed just below that on the 4-hour candles. We did wick above it, but that's going to be the pressure to the upside between 92.6 and 93.6. And then this guy here is at about 90.2, which is right below the daily pivot, 90.4. So we've already talked about the shorter time frame. Let's talk about the longer time frame and just kind of like get a quick check going into the weekend of what realistically the market looks like. And the market at the moment still looks like we have already set our highs and we are in a downtrend. That's what it looks like. Let's go to the higher time frames. I've talked about this in the other videos, but when we break the monthly SMA, it's not good news for Bitcoin. It typically signals that we are done, and we're done for the cycle. Now, very different time in history over here, very different time in history over here, and we're now starting to see, stories about peak fear and everything while we're just first interacting with the SMA, whereas over here, this would have already been, we would have been in peak fear on the fear and greed index for several months at this time, as far as I'm aware. So there's a good possibility that we do continue to see a breakdown. I don't really think any further than in here. And I think it's more likely that we would have a long stop somewhere in here between 69 and 73, 74 if we actually do continue to see this breakdown, which this, honestly, this is what we really need to pay attention to for Sunday. This is the most important thing, is how close are we to 87.7. As long as we are well above 87.7, which we are currently at, whatever that is, 90.9, I don't think that's quite high enough to be considered bullish. I would say it's more neutral to slightly bearish because we did break it. As you can see over here, we closed that candle well above it. We close the next candle kind of kissing it, just barely. This is really all that we have to go off of, is this guy as well as this one over here. This is 2017, or actually technically this would have been 2018 by the time we actually cross it. But as you can see, we peak in December, peak in January for Ethereum. Everything starts coming down. And we still have most of 2018 where it's not clear in terms of reading the SMA whether or not we're in a bear market. Now, obviously, if you're looking at it just from price, it was pretty obvious as of here. As of March, it's already pretty obvious. Okay, shit, we're in a bear market, And that's, I feel like, was also pretty obvious here. Like we saw, this was more extended, that it took us to get to the SMA, whereas for us now, it's really not. It was like one major breakdown. We'll probably see another month that closes above it, but is December, I would imagine, is going to close here. So this, I've talked about this a bunch. I've talked about it in the other videos. I will mention it again now. This is really the pivot that I think is going to be crucial, is 106.7. We already saw 80 touch, what I think is going to be, what I would say is best case scenario for December is we get a close for November. That's somewhere over here. That's closer to 94, maybe even to the top of this guy. So 96 plus. That would be a best case scenario. That's going to give us permission and possibly enough momentum to get above 106.7K. But at the moment, say this gets pushed down between here and Sunday, and this is where we close Sunday, is right on the line. That's not good. That puts pressure going into December that we need to retest this Fibonacci pivot first, because that's the only thing holding us up from right here at 87.7, 87.5, whatever the SMA is at, which it does look like the monthly SMA is starting to curve a bit. Not quite a sharp downtrend yet, but that is likely what will begin happening. If we look at over here, it continues to round out for a while and then just continues to drop. If we look over here, same thing. It continues to round out for a while. And in that case, it does just continue higher, which is very possible. It's quite possible that we just continue to see it round and round and round. Price will drop down into this region, and then it'll pump back up as it's still flat, and then it'll continue higher, which is still my base case, is that it will continue higher over time. Of course, Bitcoin really is, the more that you interact with it, the more that you trade with it, the more I think it just makes sense for you to stack it passively, and then I just use it as information to trade things like iBit or Coinbase or Robinhood or whatever. It gives information about the rest of the market depending on how Bitcoin is behaving. So that's really what we need to see for the end of the month on Sunday. I probably won't have internet that day, so I don't know if I will have a video out, but I should be able to as of Monday, hopefully. And that's really like the most important thing I would say, is where do we close in relation to that 94.77. I would say is like, that's going to be best case scenario, because again, it'll give us permission to interact with 106.7 in a strong way. And that's the main thing that is preventing us from there. It's actually on the anchor volume profile. I think it's slightly lower than that. It's this guy and this guy. 104. Well, I guess right around there, right around the same number, 104.7. That's really like that area is going to let us know, do we have enough momentum to push back for all-time highs? Now, the market is going to reflect this as all-time high right here in July, slight new all-time high failure, slight new all-time high mega failure. So it's going to interpret that. I don't know exactly what the fuck the name of the candle pattern is, but it's basically going to interpret that as a failed all-time high. Kind of similar to how this one, there's a lot of people who just mark it from here. This is actually where we peaked. And then this was just the market being optimistic towards the end of the year, and it just kind of lining up with quantitative easing. Whereas in this case over here, we actually haven't hit the quantitative easing yet. So there's still some talks about whether or not we're going to get a rate cut in December. It does seem like Trump is probably going to replace Jerome Powell with someone who is favorable for his plans for rate cuts, which would introduce new liquidity into the market next year. I really think next year is going to be a tough one to call. It could be a very short bear market. We could just get this move continues down until, say, April or July. And that's when we get, into this 70K region, maybe even as low as the high 50s. And then it could just rocket after that. My base case is still that we're going to see a recession next year, but there are some, where's my other list? Never mind. I'm not going to show you in this video. Video is already getting too long. There are some other indicators that were showing strength again in the housing market that hasn't quite failed like I thought it was going to, which I guess is a good sign, but it really just kicks the can down the road. It does seem, actually, this is what I'll do. I'll give you a little bonus. I'll talk about gold and SPY real quick. So it does seem like they are currently in the process of, that's not what an all-time high looks like yet. It could still have another push higher. It seems like it's very close to doing so, but that'll really tell us, is this market done already? Does this market need to continue running before, everything bleeds out of the markets? At the moment, that's very close to all-time high. That's probably like, I never do the shift tool properly. How do I do it? I'm so good at trading with you guys. I'm a fucking legend. You're literally talking about barely a 1% move to all-time highs for SPY. So I think that's something that we're going to see moving into December, is we might see a pump for SPY and for gold. That'll obviously trickle down to Bitcoin a little bit, but as you can see, very different shape on the chart for Bitcoin than SPY and gold. SPY and gold have still been, if this is all-time high, they've still been relatively here, whereas Bitcoin is way down. There's a possibility that's just, coiling up for another push, but wouldn't say that it's my base case. My base case is still that we're going to continue to break down into the middle of next year, and then maybe we see a recovery after that. April is always a very important month. I do think that the UFC event at the White House is specifically designed to fucking distract people from whatever craziness is going on in the markets at the time. So just something to keep in mind, that next year is going to be very volatile in a similar way to how this year was, quite frankly. Your best bet this year would have been levering up hard in March and April and doing pretty much nothing the rest of the time, and then selling over here between whatever, August essentially, and September, October. But that's all hindsight bias. What I can say, before I end today's video, which thank you so much for everyone who has listened to the end. Really appreciate all the subscribers I'm getting directly from YouTube, as well as all the people who have come over here from Threads and the other social medias. But pretty much, we are seeing way more stair stepping now than we ever used to. This was parabolic. The previous ones were parabolic. We're not really seeing that anymore. I know some people feel some type of way about that, where they really expect to see a parabolic top still, but this is still very much an uptrend, and there's nothing preventing this from switching to either a consolidation trend or just kind of being, the top at the moment. I don't think we're going to ever see back down to like here. I'm getting less confident in that the more I pay attention to the markets, the more it really seems like we're going to have a decent amount of resilience in here and in here. And it's possible we break that. Like if we look at 2021, this was kind of the relative low over here, and we did break that by about 50% roughly. So if we're to assume that same basis where, this is the lowest that we went during the market. So if we took it 50% for that, that's, math, that'd be $39,000. So that puts us over here, which I can believe. We got some levels here, we got some levels here that show us that we have resilience there. But that's kind of what you need to be prepared for. Is like that's a worst case scenario. Is that's going to 39 to 54 ish. I think a much more likely scenario, and I've been talking about this on Threads for a really long time, is we're going to retest the March 2024 highs, which is like 73.4, 74-ish. That I feel like is very likely from this move, especially if we do get faked out at 96 or 106.7, like I said. And that's going to be logical. We're going to go back to the 80K pivot, and then we're going to want confirmation of the 70K levels. So that's all I'm going to talk about for this video. I may or may not have one out on Sunday. I'm not sure. I'm moving to a new apartment and don't have internet yet. But thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your time, and I'll see you in the next one.